Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into one of the most brilliant and, frankly, morally complex mystery novels ever written, Keigo Higashino's absolute masterpiece, The Devotion of Suspect X. Now, we aren't here to just rehash the plot or solve the crime. Instead, we're taking a deep dive into an incredible roundtable discussion featuring top minds in psychology, philosophy, and literature. We're going to deconstruct the completely fascinating and, honestly, deeply disturbing psychology behind the ultimate sacrifice. Okay, let's dive into this, because right off the bat, this question immediately challenges our own moral compass. We all know Ishigami, right? The brilliant but totally solitary high school math teacher who covers up a murder for his neighbor, Yasuko. He orchestrates this horrific sequence of events just to keep her safe. Yet, as readers, when you strip away the sheer genius of his plot, you're left with a profoundly unsettling reality. We find ourselves practically rooting for him. We literally want him to get away with it and be forgiven. But why? How on earth does an author manipulate us into empathizing so deeply with a perpetrator? Well, to really get this, we have to start with the title itself. Literary scholar Kazuhide Nabae points out that the word devotion creates a problem for us before we even crack open the book. It asks us to imagine purity. It kind of whispers ideas of loyalty, of love without self-interest, and of total surrender. Because that word is planted in our mind before we've actually evaluated what Ishigami is doing, it begins to color his suffering with this tragic beauty. It totally masks the devastating, hidden cost of his actions. So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. The empathy trap. 2. Yasuko's invisible prison. 3. Safer than being loved. And 4. Continue the conversation. Section 1. The empathy trap. Why we fall for the brilliant suspect. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how psychologist Paul Bloom breaks this psychological framing down into what he calls an empathy package. Just think about how Ishigami is presented to us. He's this brilliant mind, right? But he's trapped in a narrowing, mundane life, teaching ungrateful students. He is profoundly lonely. So when he experiences just ordinary, simple kindness from his neighbor Yasuko and her daughter Masato, it feels almost miraculous to him. And here is what's absolutely crucial to our empathy. He loves them without expecting any conventional reward, and he's entirely willing to suffer the ultimate punishment for them. Bloom points out that this specific combination is an extraordinarily powerful empathy package. It makes Ishigami so completely understandable that we actually risk treating our deep sympathy for his pain as a justification for his horrific crimes. Which leads us to a pretty dark consequence. Philosophers Martha Nussbaum and Michael Sandel note that by focusing entirely on Ishigami's suffering, we basically render the actual murder victim completely invisible. The novel makes our empathy fundamentally unequal. I mean, we know every single painful detail about Ishigami's emotional price, but we know almost nothing about the innocent person whose life was sacrificed just to make his alibi work. When our empathy becomes unequal like that, our moral judgment becomes unequal too. We end up excusing the horrific simply because we are too close to the perpetrator's pain. Section 2. Yasuko's invisible prison, the crushing burden of a pure gift. Let's shift the moral center away from Ishigami for a second. What does it actually feel like to be on the receiving end of a sacrifice so massive that gratitude itself becomes a cage? And this brilliantly illustrates psychotherapist Esther Perel's point about the stark divide between intention and reality here. Ishigami's internal intention is pure. I ask for nothing in return. He demands no payment, no romance, nothing at all. But Yasuko doesn't experience his sacrifice from inside his head. She experiences it externally, as this impossible debt. As Perel explains, if you buy someone dinner, they can just return the favor. But what do you do when someone surrenders their entire future, their very freedom for you? The relationship becomes permanently asymmetrical. It's a massive, life-altering gift that Yasuko was literally never given the chance to refuse. Martha Nussbaum hits the nail on the head with this thought. To respect another person is to recognize them as someone whose choices remain morally real. By irreversibly scripting Isako's entire future, even if his intention was to save her, Ishigami strips her of her dignity and autonomy. He arranges circumstances so perfectly that every future joy Yasuko ever experiences is going to exist right beside the crushing knowledge of his destruction. He hasn't just protected her, he's confined her inside a reality she didn't choose. Just imagine carrying that weight, knowing every moment of peace you have was bought with someone else's ultimate destruction. That is the invisible prison. Section 3. Safer than being loved. Why did Ishigami need to become necessary? So the crucial point is, Why did Ishigami's love have to take the form of becoming absolutely necessary? Esther Perel diagnoses the deepest flaw in our protagonist beautifully here. She argues, being necessary may have felt much safer than simply being loved. Think about it. If you ask someone to love you, they can say no. You have to tolerate uncertainty, risk, and just ordinary human vulnerability. But if you secretly orchestrate a scenario where you become completely indispensable to their survival, you never have to ask. You entirely avoid rejection. For Ishigami, extreme usefulness was the ultimate defense mechanism against the terrifying messiness of a real human relationship. Let's move to and see how this builds into a tragic trajectory for someone who literally doesn't know how to just receive care. Step 1, when Yasuko shows him ordinary kindness, like just a neighborly greeting or a friendly smile at the bento shop, he can't process it, so he turns that simple care into a debt. Step 2, he turns that debt into a repayment by shielding her from the murder investigation. Step 3, that extreme repayment becomes his entire identity. He is now solely her protector. And finally, step 4, that identity crystallizes into what we call devotion. It's absolute, it is entirely one-sided, and it violently removes all need for mutual consent or negotiation. Which brings us to, honestly, the most heartbreaking realization of the entire roundtable. The most terrifying act for Ishigami wasn't orchestrating a horrific crime. It wasn't deceiving the police, and it wasn't even facing life in prison. It was simply asking Yasuko for dinner. A heroic, self-destructive sacrifice can be controlled and endured completely alone. But asking someone for a modest date, facing their potential rejection, living with the unpredictable uncertainty of an ordinary, vulnerable relationship, for a man as profoundly isolated as Ishigami, that was the one equation he simply could not bear to solve. Section 4. Continue the conversation. The ethics of exposing the truth. So we've unpacked the devastating psychology behind Ishigami's actions, but the story is far from over. The experts in this roundtable pivot to two incredibly compelling questions regarding Detective Yukawa's intervention. First, if a friend chooses a path of total self-erasure, do you have the moral right to expose their truth against their will? Was Yukawa defending objective justice, or was he just imposing his own paternalistic judgment? And second, why does the emotional collapse at the very end of this novel hurt us far more than the intellectual satisfaction of seeing the mystery solved? Now, we've only scratched the surface of this profound discussion. I've covered the first 3 topics of this explainer today, but to read the rest of this brilliant roundtable analysis and dive into topics 4 and 5, please visit https://imaginarytalks.com/devotion of suspect X, psychology, Ishigami love. I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. When suffering makes sacrifice look sacred, how do we tell the difference between profound love and profound self-erasure? It's a question that's going to stay with you long after the final page. Thank you for joining me on The Explainer, Focus Learners. Until next time, keep questioning what you read.